Ah, there you are, my dear. Come in, come in. I've been waiting for you. The rain's dancing on the roof, the fire's humming soft, and my old chair is creaking just the way it always does when I settle in for a story. Now hush, get comfortable, close your eyes if you like. Grandpa's got something special for you tonight. In a quiet, winding lane, tucked behind the busy streets of a sleepy town, there stood a little watchmaker's shop with fogged-up windows and a warm yellow glow that never seemed to flicker. The townfolk often passed it without noticing, but to those who paid attention, it was a little pocket of magic, a place where time seemed to slow down, where you could hear the ticking of hundreds of clocks working in harmony like a soft, mechanical lullaby. The shop belonged to an old man named Mr. Elliot, who wore a brass monocle, a vest with too many pockets, and a gentle smile that never quite left his face. He lived alone in the room above his shop, with only the sound of rain and ticking clocks to keep him company each night. But he didn't mind. He loved time, not just the seconds and minutes, but the memories it held, the people it carried, and the quiet stories hidden between the tops. And unknown to most, Mr. Elliot's favorite clock sat in the window. It wasn't the most expensive or the most beautiful. It was cracked at the base and missing a hand, but to him, it held the most precious story of all. Now, listen closely, my dear, because tonight I'll tell you why that old broken clock in the window held more magic than any working one ever could. Ah, that's it. Just breathe slow and steady now. The rain's still singing on the rooftop, and this old story is just stretching its legs. Let me tell you what made that clock in the window so special. Long before Mr. Elliot's hair turned white and the wrinkles settled kindly across his face, he was a young man with clever hands and a restless heart. He traveled from village to village, fixing timepieces for farmers, innkeepers, and sailors alike, never staying in one place too long. One chilly spring morning, he arrived in a cobblestone town by the sea. Seabrook, it was called, where the salty air smelled of driftwood and the wind carried tales from far-off places. It was there he met her. Her name was Clara, and she ran the small bookstore just across from the watch shop he rented for a month. Clara had eyes like storm clouds and a voice that could hush a room without trying. She had a habit of sipping tea by the shop window while reading thick novels with torn corners, and Elliot found himself watching her through his cracked glass more often than he cared to admit. On a rainy afternoon, not unlike tonight, Clara walked into his shop for the first time, carrying a small antique clock tucked beneath her shawl. "It stopped ticking," she said gently, "but I'm not sure I want it fixed." Puzzled, Elliot turned the timepiece over in his hands. It was missing one hand entirely. The minute hand had vanished, and the hour hand was stuck forever at 4. He glanced up at her with a question ready on his tongue, but she only smiled and said, "It belonged to my grandfather. He said it stopped the moment my grandmother said yes." She chuckled, brushing a damp curl behind her ear. "He always said it caught time in its most perfect moment." That day, Elliot didn't fix the clock. He polished it gently, cleaned the dust from inside, and handed it back to her exactly as it was. And that small broken clock, well, it never left his thoughts again. As the years passed, that memory remained tucked in Elliot's chest like a soft, ticking heart. And long after Clara was gone, after life had taken its turns and left him with quiet and clocks, he placed that same broken timepiece in the front window of his shop, right where she would have seen it, right where the light kissed it every evening like a sigh from the past. Every time he looked at it, it whispered the only moment he ever wanted to keep forever. Now, don't drift off just yet. The story is only just beginning to unfold. You still with me, dear? Good. Just let the sound of the rain melt the day away. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow. Grandpa's got more story to share. Years had passed since Clara's voice last filled the room, but her presence lingered in that little watch shop like the scent of lavender that never quite left the curtains. Every tick of every clock seemed to carry her name, as if the gears whispered it in soft metallic murmurs when no one was listening. And yet, Elliot kept on, never missing a beat. He'd rise with the soft creak of sunrise, light the old lantern in the corner, and sit behind the counter, surrounded by the gentle symphony of his creations. There were clocks of every kind, grandfather clocks with brass pendulums swaying like lullabies, tiny pocket watches engraved with initials long forgotten, delicate mantel clocks whose painted faces stared dreamily into the dusk. But none of them ever dared take the place of that little broken one in the window. Elliot had never remarried, never moved again. He lived above the shop in a small apartment with crooked floorboards and a narrow bed that remembered the shape of his body better than he did. In the evenings, after polishing gears and adjusting springs, he'd take his tea and sit beside the window where the rain would draw rivers down the glass and the old clock would catch the light just right. Sometimes he'd talk to it, not out loud, not quite, just little murmurs under his breath. "Do you remember, Clara?" he'd whisper, "that afternoon with the lemon cake and the book of poems? You said the world felt like it was waiting to exhale." He'd chuckle softly, voice brittle with age. "I think it's still waiting." But it wasn't just Elliot who felt something unusual about that clock. Customers would pause at the window, drawn to it without knowing why. Children would press their noses to the glass and stare, wide-eyed. Travelers from out of town would ask, "Why do I feel calm looking at it?" Elliot never had an answer, at least not one they could understand. But deep down, he knew that clock wasn't keeping time. It was holding it, holding a moment too precious to let go. And though the world outside spun faster and louder each year, though technology moved on and time was tracked by screens and satellites, there in that tiny shop, on that little windowsill in the rain, time had been paused by love, a quiet, imperfect, beautiful love that asked for nothing more than to be remembered. Now, my dear, if your eyes are getting heavy, you're not alone, but there's more yet. Shall we go on? Grandpa's still got plenty to tell, still with me, my dear. Good. Let the weight of the world fall off your shoulders now. Let the ticking and the rain do all the talking while I carry you deeper into the tale. Above the ticking sanctuary of the shop, hidden in the top drawer of Elliot's nightstand, was a bundle of letters, 36 to be exact, tied together with a faded green ribbon that had once belonged to Clara. Each one was written in the same careful script, each envelope unsealed, and each addressed to the same woman who had once walked into his life on a rainy afternoon and never truly walked out. He never mailed them. They weren't for sending. They were for remembering. Every letter began the same way. "Clara, if I could speak to you just once more." and from there the ink flowed like rain down a window pane. He wrote to her about the little things. The funny customer who asked if time could be rewound. The new clock he had restored that chimed like a bell at sea. The cat that took up residence in the alley and insisted on curling up beside the door each morning. But as the years went by, the letters deepened. They spoke of missing her voice during storms, of the ache that came with silent winters, of how the world changed while he stood still. He told her about the sound of the train that passed at midnight, the same one they once rode to the edge of the countryside to watch wildflowers bloom. He spoke of dreams that blurred with memory, of mornings where her name was the first breath he took, and of nights when he swore he could hear her footsteps on the stairs. Those letters weren't sad. Not really. They were tender. They were filled with the kind of love that never demanded to be returned, only remembered. The kind that waited patiently beside a dusty windowsill, tucked in between seconds, and sighed through old springs and gears. Elliot never showed the letters to anyone. Some things, he believed, were meant to be held quietly, like warm tea on a cold evening or the last rays of sunlight before twilight. He would sometimes reread one on stormy nights like this, tracing the curve of each letter with a trembling finger, and whisper her name into the ticking silence. Clara, not as a cry, but as a comfort, like the closing of a chapter that had no need for an ending. And though the shop never saw more than a handful of visitors each day, that little clock in the window never lost its glow. It became a symbol, though most people didn't know why. A quiet piece of the past, keeping watch for something lost, but not gone. You still awake, little one? Don't worry if your eyes begin to flutter. Grandpa's voice will carry you a while longer. The story still has time left in it, just like the old clock. Now take another deep breath, my dear. Let the world grow distant. You're safe here, with Grandpa's voice, the rain against the windows, and a story stitched with time itself. It was on an autumn morning that a boy named Jonah wandered into Mr. Elliott's shop, clutching something tightly in his palm. He was no older than 10, with shoes that had seen too many puddles, and eyes too wide for someone so quiet. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping in, the bell above the door chiming with a tired jingle. Mr. Elliott, who had just finished winding a brass pocket watch, looked up and offered the boy a gentle smile. Jonah didn't speak at first. He simply walked to the counter and placed a small rusted object on the glass. A broken compass, its needle spinning wildly as if lost in a world it no longer understood. It belonged to my father, Jonah said softly. He used it when he was in the Navy. It stopped working after he didn't come back. Elliot's heart sank. He had heard loss speak before, but never quite so quietly. The boy's voice didn't tremble. It was the stillness in it that told the truth. Elliot picked up the compass, holding it carefully in his weathered hands. It wasn't just broken. It had been loved to the point of wear, the brass worn smooth and the glass scratched from years in someone's pocket, someone far from home. He didn't promise to fix it, not at first. Instead, he said, "Would you like to sit with me while I take a look?" Jonah nodded, climbing onto the old stool beside the workbench, his legs swinging just above the floor. For the next hour, the shop filled with quiet clicking, tweezers, gears, and gentle breaths as Elliot worked beneath the magnifying glass, telling Jonah stories of clocks that once rang in castles and watches that had crossed oceans. And Jonah listened, his eyes following the old man's hand like a student learning an ancient craft. When the compass was finally still, its needle now pointing true, Elliot handed it back. "It may not find every place," he said, "but it will always lead you to the memory of him." Jonah held it to his chest, and for the first time since he arrived, he smiled. Not a wide grin, but a soft one, the kind that told you something had shifted, if only a little. From that day on, Jonah became a regular visitor. He'd stop by after school, sometimes with a broken trinket, sometimes with a story of his own. And slowly, the quiet corners of the shop began to fill with the sound of young laughter again. It reminded Elliot of days long past, of wonder and questions and the joy of fixing things, not just with tools, but with time. And as Jonah left that day, compass in hand, he paused at the window and stared at the broken clock. "Why don't you fix that one?" he asked. Elliot just smiled. "Some things are meant to stay just as they are." "Still awake, little one? Or maybe already dreaming? Don't worry. Grandpa's voice will guide you just a little farther yet." "Ah, there you are, still listening. Good. Let the world fall behind you now like a coat you've taken off after a long day. Here in the story, there's only warmth, time, and the smell of old wood and tea leaves. That winter, the winds grew sharp and the air thin with frost, curling through the narrow alleys of the town and slipping under doorways like a mischievous cat. But inside Elliot's little shop, it was always warm. The old radiator hissed and clanked like an old friend clearing his throat, and a kettle was always on the stove upstairs, ready to hum its soft lullaby just when the evening light began to dim. The clocks, each with its own voice, kept a chorus that made the place feel alive, like a quiet orchestra of time. One evening, as snowflakes started to fall gently over the town, a knock came at the door. Not the usual chime of a customer, but a polite, hesitant knock. Elliot opened the door to find a young woman wrapped in a knitted shawl, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her breath rising in clouds, "but I saw the light from the street. My train was delayed and I'm not from around here. May I just sit for a bit?" Elliot nodded, no questions asked. "Of course," he said, as if he'd been expecting her all along. "Come in out of the cold. Tea's nearly ready." She sat by the window, her hands close to the little stove he kept near the counter. She introduced herself as Mary Ann, a school teacher from a coastal town, passing through on her way to visit her aging aunt. The snow had caught her by surprise, and the silence of the unfamiliar town had made her uneasy, until she saw the soft glow of Elliot's lantern through the fogged glass. They shared tea in mismatched cups, his with a chipped rim, hers with a delicate crack that made it all the more comforting. They didn't speak much, not at first, just the sound of the clocks, the hiss of the kettle, and the muffled whisper of snow falling on the roof. But after a time, Marianne spoke of her childhood, of a grandfather who repaired wind-up toys and told bedtime stories about stars that ticked like clocks in the sky. Elliot smiled at that, for he too believed the sky held gears we could never quite see. She looked around the shop with wonder in her eyes. "This place," she said, "it feels like it remembers things no one else does." And Elliot, with that soft, faraway look in his eyes, replied, Some places hold stories so gently that time forgets to take them away. Marianne stayed for over an hour. When the snow let up and the wind softened, she rose to go. Elliot walked her to the door, handed her a small tin of tea leaves, Clara's favorite blend, and wished her safe travels. As she stepped out into the cold, she turned and smiled. "Thank you," she said, "for the warmth and the time." And just like that, she was gone. But her cup stayed on the counter for a while, unwashed, holding the last fingerprint she left behind. Now close your eyes if they aren't closed already. Listen to the rain. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Grandpa still has more to share? Still with me, my dear one? Good. Then hush your thoughts now. Let the outside world dim and come sit back inside this quiet little shop with Grandpa. The clocks are still ticking, the rain is still falling, and another memory is just about to unfold. There was a wooden shelf in the far corner of Elliot's shop, just above eye level, where a row of music boxes rested like sleeping birds. Most people never noticed them. They were old, delicate things, some carved with roses, others with worn gold trim or tiny hand-painted flowers faded by time. Each held a tune, but not one had been wound in years, all except for one. It was a small walnut box with a mother-of-pearl inlay of a crescent moon and stars. The hinges were soft, the velvet inside threadbare, but its key still turned smooth. Elliot kept it near his bench and would sometimes wind it gently in the evenings, letting the slow, lilting melody drift through the shop like a lullaby for the old clocks. He never told anyone, but that music box had once belonged to Clara. She gave it to him on their third autumn together, on a rainy morning not unlike this one. They had spent the entire day indoors, listening to the rain strike the glass in rhythms, sipping warm cider, and talking about nothing and everything. She had brought the box wrapped in a scarf, smiling like a secret, and said only, "It's for the moments when words aren't enough." And indeed the tune, soft, uncertain, beautiful, said more than either of them ever could. Long after she was gone, Elliot kept it close, not to weep, but to remember. The song became part of the shop's soul. And one night, just as a heavy storm rolled in, the music box brought someone else to its memory. A girl named Eliza wandered into the shop. She was a musician from the city, in town, visiting her uncle. She had been walking through the rain, sheltering beneath her umbrella, when the music, faint and ghostly, reached her ears like a whisper from a dream. She followed it. She stood in silence just beyond the threshold, listening to the melody. When Elliot looked up from his bench and saw her there, soaked from the storm and wide-eyed, he didn't ask why she'd come. He simply gestured toward the kettle and said, "You're just in time." Over warm mugs, she told him about the song, how it felt familiar, though she couldn't place it, how it made her chest ache in the softest way. "It reminds me of my grandmother," she said quietly. "She used to hum something like it when she thought no one was listening." Elliot nodded. Some songs aren't meant to be remembered. They're meant to find their way back to us. Eliza asked if she could come back and record the melody. He agreed. She did. And before the week was over, she returned with a violin and played along with the box. The shop, for the first time in years, rang with living music. Notes danced across ticking clocks, slipped through shelves, and warmed the worn floorboards. Even the old cat that had made its bed in the corner lifted its head and purred. After she left, the shop felt full again. Not crowded, just full. The melody stayed in the walls. Elliot never stopped playing the box, but now, when he did, he sometimes heard her violin too, still echoing in the air. And he would smile, because once again, something lost had quietly found its way home. Still listening, my little dreamer? That's good. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Let the rain keep falling. Ah, still here with Grandpa, I see. That's good. Keep listening, dear. Let the rain pat gently on your windows while I tell you about the winter when time itself decided to rest. It was the kind of winter that comes only once in a lifetime, the kind that hushes even the birds and wraps the world in white silence. The little town lay buried under snowdrifts so high they swallowed fence posts, and the sky seemed to hang low with a softness that made everyone speak in whispers. Even the church bell, which usually rang sharp and proud each morning, gave up halfway through January. Its last chime echoed through the snow like a yawn before sleep. Inside Elliot's shop, time had slowed to something nearly sacred. The clocks ticked more gently, as if reluctant to wake the hours. The window panes fogged with every breath, and the warm scent of firewood and cinnamon tea filled the air like a blanket you never wanted to leave. Outside, children bundled in scarves shuffled past the shop, their laughter muffled beneath layers of wool and wonder, and yet one clock didn't tick at all. It sat on the high shelf near the back wall, wrapped in a shawl of dust and cobwebs. It was a curious thing, a standing clock shaped like a tower, with delicate silver filigree and a glass dome that fogged when the shop was warm. No one asked about it, and Elliot never mentioned it. It simply sat there, silent, resting. One day, young Jonah, who now came every week like clockwork himself, pointed up and asked, "Why doesn't that one work?" Elliot paused, eyes on the glass dome. "That clock," he said, "is sleeping. Has been for many winters now. Can't you wake it up?" The old man smiled. "Not all things need waking, Jonah. Some things choose to sleep until they're truly needed." But the boy wouldn't let it go. The next time he came, he brought mittens for the cat and a tiny notebook where he wrote down how each clock sounded. "This one ticks like a horse trotting," he'd say, "and this one sounds like it's chewing something slowly. But the silent tower clock, that one remained quiet, stubbornly still, no matter how long he watched, until the night the storm came. A heavy wind rolled down from the hills, stronger than any the town had seen in years. It howled like it was looking for something. The power flickered, and lights across the town went dark. Even Elliot's shop, which always seemed immune to the outside world, dimmed until only the fireplace cast a glow. Jonah had fallen asleep in the big reading chair, curled up with the old cat on his lap. Elliot stood by the window, watching snow swirl in the lamplight, and then tick. It was quiet at first, so faint he thought he imagined it, but then it came again. Tick, tock, tick, tock. He turned. The silver tower clock on the shelf had awakened. Its pendulum swayed slowly, casting long shadows across the wall, and its hands moved with solemn purpose. For the first time in years, it breathed time again. Jonah stirred. "It's ticking," he murmured. Elliot nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Sometimes, even time chooses when to return." They didn't touch it, didn't try to open it or wind it. They just listened. And all night, while the storm shook the world outside, the old clock sang a steady lullaby of time. Soft, sure, and unafraid. And in the morning, when the sun rose over a town blanketed in light and quiet, the clock fell still once more. Now rest, little one. Close your eyes and let the ticking carry you. Grandpa's here. The rain is still falling. Still with me, my little one. Good. Settle in now. Pull the blanket higher and let Grandpa take you back inside that warm wooden shop where even the air remembers things. This next part begins on a morning that started like any other until it didn't. It was a gray morning when it arrived, the kind of morning where the mist clung low and gentle and every breath turned to clouds in front of your face. Elliot had just finished sweeping the front step, the soft bristles of the broom brushing against the stone like a whisper. The clocks were still warming up, ticking to life one by one, when he found it. A letter. No stamp, no return address. Just a thick ivory envelope slipped beneath the door sometime in the night, its edges damp from the morning chill. It was sealed with a simple thread of red string, tied carefully, like someone had taken their time. On the front, in the most delicate ink he had ever seen, was written, "For the one who still remembers." He held it for a moment, heart caught between curiosity and something else, something older, like a dream you forgot you were having. Then, with a quiet breath, he untied the string and opened it. There was no greeting, no signature, just a short letter in that same soft ink. Somewhere in your clocks, there is one that does not belong to you. It remembers a promise made before your time. Listen for it, not with your ears, but with your heart. That was all. Elliot read it twice, then a third time. He looked around the shop, the way one might scan a crowded room for a familiar face. All the clocks ticked in rhythm, each one a memory, each one a friend. But now, one of them, he didn't know which, felt like a stranger. For the rest of the day, he moved quietly through the shop, not to repair, not to wind or polish, but to feel. He ran his hand gently over the smooth oak casing of a grandfather clock, listened to the tiny heartbeat of a pocket watch, stood with eyes closed beside the cuckoo in the corner. The sound of time filled the room like warm music, and yet something was missing, or maybe hiding. That night, the letter lay open on his workbench beside a candle and a half-drunk cup of chamomile tea. He didn't lock the door when he went to bed. Something inside him said the answer would not come by force. And he was right. Because sometimes the clocks don't tell time. Sometimes they tell stories. And this story, well, it had only just begun. Are your eyes getting heavy now? That's good. Let them. Grandpa will still be here when the rain drizzles gently on your dreams. Ah, you're still awake, little one. Good. Curl in closer now. The storms move further off, but the rain's still falling gently. Just the right sound for a tale like this. We're reaching the deeper parts now. You remember that letter, don't you? The one that said a clock doesn't belong? Well, that letter stayed with Elliot longer than you'd expect. It was a week before anything unusual happened. Elliot had taken to moving slower through the shop, not out of age, but out of attention. He would pause longer than usual in front of certain clocks, listen more deeply to the rhythm of their tick, as though trying to hear something beneath the surface. Jonah noticed. "Are you looking for something?" he asked one afternoon, holding a mug of warm milk. Elliot only smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach all the way to his eyes. It was on the 7th day after the letter arrived that something finally stirred. That morning, Jonah had brought an old toy train for Elliot to fix, and while the boy sat near the fire reading, Elliot worked in the back room. The shop ticked around them like a quiet orchestra. That's when Jonah looked up and saw it, a small round clock sitting on the shelf near the doorway. But something was strange. It wasn't there before. He was sure of it. It wasn't big, just about the size of a teacup, with a wooden frame and a single winding key sticking from the side. Its face was aged, but not dusty, and the numbers weren't numbers at all, just simple dots. No name, no maker's mark. And the second hand, it moved backward. "Elliot," Jonah called out softly. The old man returned, wiping his hands on a cloth. Jonah pointed. "That clock, it wasn't there yesterday?" Elliot froze, not out of fear, but recognition. He walked over slowly and lifted the tiny thing from the shelf, turning it gently in his hands. It ticked, but not like the others. Its sound was faint, not mechanical, but more like a heartbeat under a blanket. "I didn't place this here," he said, more to himself than to the boy. The room felt still. The fire crackled softly behind them. "Maybe it's the one from the letter," Jonah offered. Elliot didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the clock down on the counter, eyes fixed on the backward-moving hand. "This clock," he said finally, "remembers something I don't." They both sat with it in silence, listening. As the minutes ticked in reverse, the room seemed to change, just slightly. The light grew a little warmer. The ticking from the other clock slowed, as if out of respect. And somewhere in the shop, though neither of them saw it, one clock stopped ticking altogether, as if it had been waiting for this moment to rest. Later that night, after Jonah had gone home and the fire had died to glowing embers, Elliot sat alone with the backward clock. He placed it in the middle of his workbench, lit a single candle, and opened the notebook he hadn't used in over 10 years. He wrote only one line. "This is not a clock for keeping time. This is a clock for returning to it." Then he closed the book, blew out the flame, and let the rain finish the night's story. And now, dear one, your own night is calling too. Let your dreams tick backward through warm memories and quiet forest. You're still here, listening? That makes Grandpa very happy. Pull the blanket up close, little one. The rain's falling softly now, like time slowing just for us. This part of the story is where the shop breathes a secret out into the quiet. Let me tell you how Elliot finally heard what wasn't being said. The strange little clock, the one that ticked backward, didn't behave like the others. It didn't need winding. It didn't stop. It simply kept reversing the seconds as if it were quietly erasing time, one tick at a time. And more curiously, each time Elliot sat with it, he felt younger. Not in his bones. They still creaked and stretched like old wood. But in his mind, in his heart, he began to remember things he'd long buried under decades of ticking hours and closed drawers. It began with a scent. Lavender and cedarwood, faint but clear, floated out of the clock the third morning it sat on his bench. The aroma was so sudden that Elliot dropped his tea. He hadn't smelled that scent in over 50 years. It was her perfume, Clara. He whispered her name like a prayer to a star that had gone dark long ago. They had been childhood sweethearts in the village, two souls who spoke more with silence than words. She used to sit in the corner of the shop after school, reading poetry out loud while he tried to look busy repairing watches, pretending not to hang on every word she said. They were inseparable, like hour and minute, until the day she left for the sea. She always said she was meant to follow the tides, not the clocks. But now, as he watched the tiny clock turn its hands backward, Elliot began to hear her voice again, not in the air, but inside him, reading, laughing, telling stories while she traced her fingers across dusty counters. That day, something strange happened in the shop. Around noon, every single clock in the room stopped ticking, all at once. No sound, no tick, no tock. Even the cuckoo, who usually grumbled when it was time to pop out, stayed hidden. The only sound was the soft, steady backward ticking of the small clock on the workbench. Jonah came by as usual that afternoon and noticed the silence right away. "Are they broken?" he asked. "No," Elliot whispered. "They're listening." The boy frowned. "To what?" "To what came before." That night, after Jonah had gone home and the shadows grew longer, Elliot returned to the little clock and placed his hand gently over its face. The wood was warm, like it had soaked in sunlight. For a moment, he closed his eyes, and when he did, something unfolded inside him. A memory, not like a dream, more like stepping backward into a page of his life. He was young again, sitting on the riverbank, sketching clock designs in a notebook, and Clara was beside him, tossing pebbles into the stream. Her laughter rang out like wind chimes. The water shimmered. The sky was blue. When he opened his eyes again, the rain had started. The real rain, tapping on the shop's windows, painting slow tears on the glass. The clocks began to tick once more, as if they'd only paused to let time pass through Elliot one more time. And the backward clock, still ticking. "Now close your eyes, little one. You've made it far tonight. Let the gentle tick of time backward carry you to sweet places. And if the clocks in your dreams ever stop, listen. Something good might be returning. Still with me, my little one? That's good. The night is kind tonight. The rain sounds just like a lullaby now. Get comfy. This part is soft and quiet, like a candle flickering in a forgotten room, waiting to be noticed again. Let Grandpa tell you what happened next to old Elliot when the past came knocking again, this time with ink and paper. It was raining steadily when Elliot found the second letter. It hadn't been slipped under the door like the first. No, this one had appeared on the inside windowsill just above the bench where he kept his softest polishing cloths. The glass there was foggy with breath from the warm shop meeting the cool rain outside. And on that ledge, perfectly dry, as if protected by invisible hands, lay an envelope the color of faded daisies. Elliot hesitated before touching it. He could feel, even before opening, that this wasn't like the first. The thread around it was blue this time, a color Clara used to wear in her hair when the sky was clear. He untied it slowly, reverently, like one might unwrap a memory too delicate to look at directly. Inside was a single sheet of thin paper, aged and soft. But the ink was fresh. It read, "You kept time so well, Elliot. You gave it shape. But now you must learn to follow it, not hold it still. The one who waits in the rain has never left. She is part of the hours you never noticed were missing." There was no signature, no date, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Clara's. Elliot felt his chest tighten, not painfully, more like how the heart holds its breath before it remembers how to beat again. How could it be? He turned toward the backward clock, which now sat quietly beneath the window. its hands gently moving counter to the world. For a moment, he thought he saw something in its reflection on the glass, not just himself, but the outline of another figure behind him, small, graceful, the curve of a shoulder, the whisper of a presence he hadn't felt in years. The wind outside picked up softly, and the chimes above the shop's front door jingled once, though no one had entered. He stood there in silence, not afraid, not confused, but utterly still, like time had folded in on itself again, and he was standing in both a memory and a moment all at once. Later that evening, Jonah returned with a fresh loaf of warm bread from his grandmother and found Elliot sitting by the window, the letter in his lap, the backward clock in his hand, and a soft smile, not of happiness or sadness, but something gentler, peace. "What does the letter mean?" the boy asked, curling up nearby. Elliot didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked outside, where the rain had slowed to a hush. "I think," he finally said, "that some people never leave. They just live in different parts of time. And sometimes when the rain is just right and the clocks are quiet enough, we can hear them again." Jonah said nothing, but he leaned his head against Elliot's shoulder, and the two of them listened to the backward ticking, to the gentle hush of rain, and to the quiet truth that love, real love, never forgets where it came from. "Now hush, little one. Let your eyelids get heavier. Let your dreams fill with letters and forgotten handwriting, with rain that speaks in voices you love. When you wake, Grandpa will still be here. I see that spark in your eyes, the one that listens with wonder." Part 13 is where the story softens its voice, and the clocks begin to whisper instead of tick. Yes, this part is tender, like a song hummed through time itself. Let Grandpa tell you what happened when the watchmaker heard something not from the world, but from love itself. The rain had been steady for 3 days without stopping, painting Elliot's windows in slow-moving silver. The town outside was wrapped in a hush, as though even the trees knew something sacred was passing through the air. Inside the watch shop, every tick and tock now felt like a breath. Slow, patient, waiting. Jonah arrived earlier than usual, his small boots soaked and cheeks red from the wet wind. He didn't speak right away, just slipped quietly through the door and sat beside the backward clock. Elliot noticed something different in him, a kind of stillness, a knowing. "You feel it too?" Elliot asked gently. The boy nodded, like someone standing just out of sight. That day, Elliot didn't fix any clocks. He didn't wind or polish or adjust. Instead, he opened an old velvet box beneath the counter, one he hadn't dared touch in decades. Inside was a small locket, silver, worn at the edges. He opened it slowly, and there she was. Clara, smiling softly in the photograph, eyes full of stories she never got to finish telling. He held the locket in one hand and the backward clock in the other. "I think," he said to Jonah, "we've reached the part of time where it folds in on itself, where the past steps into the now and asks if we've been listening." Jonah stared at him wide-eyed. "Are we?" Elliot paused, his eyes misting. "I am now." The backward clock, silent for a moment, began ticking again, faster than usual, but in reverse still. The second hand spun with purpose, and the room filled with a low hum, like a chord struck in the heart of the shop. And then it happened. Every clock on the wall, from the tiny golden pocket watch to the great wooden grandfather clock, began to chime at once, but not with their usual sounds, not gongs or bells. They wept. The sound that filled the shop was unlike any Elliot or Jonah had ever heard. It was as if the clocks themselves had remembered something so tender, so beautiful, that they couldn't hold back the emotion any longer. The ticking melted into something warmer, deeper, and Elliot felt a warmth in his chest that stole the breath for his lungs. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he saw her, Clara, standing at the front of the shop, not aged, not changed, just as she had been the last day he saw her, hair tied in blue ribbon, eyes filled with gentle mischief, a book clutched to her chest. She smiled, not a ghost, not a dream, a memory that had become real just for that moment, because time had remembered how to love, and just as quickly as she appeared, she faded like mist in morning sun. But Elliot wasn't sad. No, not anymore. He turned to Jonah and said, "We've been looking at clocks wrong, my boy. They don't just measure time. They hold it, guard it, carry it forward until we're ready to receive it again." That evening, when the rain finally stopped for a moment, the shop felt brighter, softer, and the backward clock, it was still ticking. But this time, it was no longer alone. Now rest, my little listener. Let your heart be still. Let the rain carry you gently, and when you wake, maybe you'll feel the ticking too, the one that moves through memories, reminding us that love never forgets. You've come so far with me, haven't you, little one? Night after night, listening to old Elliot and his ticking world. Let Grandpa finish the tale, not with a goodbye, but a soft sigh, like the way the world breathes when the rain stops. Now, let's step into the last hour, where endings feel more like beginnings. The next morning, Elliot opened his shop early. The clouds had cleared, and a silver mist floated through the sleepy streets like a memory lingering too long in the morning air. Jonah arrived, not running, not bounding through the door like usual, but walking slowly, reverently, as if he knew something was about to change. Elliot stood by the window, the backward clock gently ticking in his hand, and for the first time, his eyes weren't searching the past. They were simply resting. "I think it's time," he said softly. Jonah tilted his head. "Time for what?" Elliot smiled, and his voice held a warmth that filled the room like sun through stained glass. "Time to let go of holding time, time to live it instead." He handed Jonah the backward clock. It was still ticking counterclockwise, but slower now, as if it too was ready to stop. "It belongs to you now," Elliot whispered. "You'll understand it someday, not all at once, but in the quiet spaces between moments." Jonah held it carefully, as if the heart of the universe now beat in his hands. And in some ways, it did. The rest of that day passed like a soft hymn. Customers came and went, unaware that the old watchmaker was saying farewell with each gentle smile, each small repair. No one noticed that the ticking of the clocks in the shop had begun to line up, not mechanically, but musically, like a choir in perfect harmony. That evening, Elliot sat by the window once more, the locket in one hand, the rain returning outside in a misty hush. He closed his eyes, and he waited, not for something to happen, but simply to be. Jonah, curled in a blanket nearby, whispered, "Will I ever see her too?" Elliot chuckled softly. "You already do. Every time you choose kindness, every time you listen, every time you stop rushing through life and just notice it." As the last chime rang out from the oldest clock on the wall, a deep golden note that hung in the air like a promise, Elliot leaned back, eyes closed, lips gently parted, in peace. And the shop fell silent, not from sorrow, but from stillness, from completion, from the final perfect tick of a story well lived. Jonah sat beside him, the backward clock resting in his lap, now finally still, and outside the rain whispered thank yous to the cobblestones. That night the town slept softer, and in dreams, in quiet, flickering dreams, the watchmaker's window glowed with a light that came from nowhere and everywhere all at once, a reminder that love outlasts time and stories never really end.